What's up, guys? Thomas here from Train Fully. This video is all about activation exercises, specifically isolated activation exercises. I'm going to show you why it's absolutely essential that we do them, how we do them, when we do them, and which muscles we do them on. All right, guys, so isolated activation exercises are usually single joint movement patterns that are designed to load a specific underactive muscle while minimizing the contribution from overactive synergists through special cues and joint actions. Now, I'm going to walk you through what all that means here in a moment, but first I want to show you why we do them. Because there are a lot of people in the fitness industry that don't think activation exercises are necessary, but these people are wrong. They haven't read the research and they don't have a strong understanding of human movement science. Isolated activation exercises are absolutely essential, and here's why. In the previous two videos, I showed you how certain muscles are prone to adaptive shortening and overactivity. What I didn't show you is how when muscles become short and overactive, they can alter a neuromuscular reflex called reciprocal inhibition. So reciprocal inhibition is a neuromuscular reflex that inhibits opposing muscles during movement. So when I contract my biceps to flex my elbow, reciprocal inhibition tells my triceps to relax. So it's a reflex that relaxes muscles on one side of a joint to accommodate contraction on the other side. And this is absolutely essential. Without it, we wouldn't be able to move. Now, remember our overactive muscles? Well, when muscles become overactive, they're constantly sending signals to the central nervous system, telling the nervous system that they're on. They're always just a little bit on. And as a result, and because of reciprocal inhibition, the nervous system then is constantly sending signals to the companion muscles on the other side of the joint, telling those muscles to relax. And as a result, those companion muscles become inhibited or underactive. And this is a dysfunction in the nervous system called altered reciprocal inhibition. Now, this is a problem just by itself, but this dysfunction goes even deeper. The muscles most susceptible to inhibition and underactivity through altered reciprocal inhibition are prime movers. Prime movers are muscles that, under normal circumstances, can generate the most amount of force for a given joint action. So when they become inhibited, we lose force production for that joint action. And that's a problem. So the nervous system compensates for that loss in force output by increasing neural drive to the synergistic muscles. So synergists are ancillary muscles that would normally assist the prime mover. But with the prime mover inhibited, these support muscles are recruited more, and as a result, they can become overactive, and they can start to dominate the movement. This is another dysfunction in the nervous system that we call synergistic dominance. It's a compensatory pattern that will allow you to get through normal daily activities, but it increases wear and tear on your joints and connective tissues and can increase your risk for injury, right? But we'll come back to this in a moment. So the common argument is that we don't need to use activation exercises, we simply need to strengthen. But this is a flawed approach, and I'll use the gluteus maximus and the dysfunction that typically develops around the hips to show you why. Because we spend so much time sitting, the muscles that cross in front of our hips, our hip flexors, they're prone to adaptive shortening. Now, when muscles become adaptively shortened, they generally also become overactive. The reason for that is fairly complex, and I'll show you why in a future video. It has to do with these specialized neuroreceptors called muscle spindles and their effect on another neuromuscular reflex called the myotatic stretch reflex. But just know that typically, when muscles become adaptively shortened, they also become overactive. So we have overactive hip flexors from sitting all day, which means our hip flexors are constantly sending signals to the central nervous system, telling the nervous system that they are on. They're always just a little bit on. And what happens next? Reciprocal inhibition becomes altered, and the nervous system starts constantly sending signals to the companion muscles on the other side of the hip joint, telling those muscles to relax. These companion muscles are the hip extensors, and the prime mover for hip extension is the gluteus maximus. So what that means is, because we spend so much time sitting, our hip flexors have become adaptively shortened. They've altered reciprocal inhibition, and we now have inhibited or underactive glutes, right? So we lose force production for hip extension. And what happens next? Well, the nervous system compensates for this loss by increasing neural drive to the synergists. Well, the synergists for hip extension are the hamstring complex, in particular the biceps femoris, the posterior fibers of adductor magnus, and the erector spinae. And as a result, these muscles become overactive and they start to dominate hip extension, which means we have synergistic dominance around the hip. Now, this doesn't just happen around the hip. Every time a muscle becomes adaptively shortened, the companion prime mover on the other side of the joint will be inhibited, and the synergist will be asked to pick up the slack, and we will end up with synergistic dominance. So the reason we can't use multi-joint strengthening exercises on an inhibited prime mover is because those exercises will simply reinforce synergistic dominance, right? If I have inhibited glutes and I try strengthening them by doing exercises like squats, deadlifts, or lunges, which muscles am I targeting? Which muscles are doing most of the work? It's not the glutes. It'll be the hamstrings, the posterior fibers of adductor magnus, and the erector spinae, right? So sure, we might get stronger, but we'll also reinforce synergistic dominance. Some people might say, okay, well, why is that a problem? Why does it matter which muscles are doing most of the work as long as I'm getting stronger? But let me first say that you can have synergistic dominance and still be very strong. I've worked with professional hockey players and professional football players that could squat and deadlift hundreds of pounds, but when I assessed them, they had synergistic dominance around their hips. And that's a problem because, remember, synergistic dominance increases wear and tear on your joints and connective tissues. So although these athletes were very strong, the reason they were coming to see me was because they were dealing with these nagging injuries like growing pulls or hamstring strains. And as an athlete, you don't want to be on the sidelines, or you don't want to be playing at 70% because you're dealing with nagging injuries. You want to play, and you want to play your best. Fixing synergistic dominance increased their capacity to play. It also made them stronger. I'm talking like 30 to 40% stronger almost immediately. It also improved their mobility and enhanced their coordination. Simply put, synergistic dominance was holding them back, and it could be holding you back as well. Isolated activation techniques are a tool that we have to increase neural drive to an inhibited prime mover and finally break that cycle of dysfunction and pain. And here's how they do that. Isolated activation techniques enhance the performance of an inhibited prime mover 6 main ways. 1, by increasing neural drive to the prime mover and restoring normal reciprocal inhibition. 2, by increasing the number of motor neurons that are activated within the prime mover. 3, by improving the synchronization of motor unit activity when the prime mover contracts. 4, by improving the intramuscular coordination of the prime mover. 5, by improving the intermuscular coordination or companionship between the prime mover and the other surrounding muscles. And 6, by increasing the rate at which the motor units within the prime mover are activated. All of this will enhance the contribution or activity of the prime mover during movement and have an immediate impact on the quality of your movement, as well as optimize your mobility while making you stronger, faster, and more coordinated. All right, so then how do we do them? Isolated activation techniques have to be single joint movement patterns. But even though they're single joint movement patterns, we still have to do them in a way that minimizes the contribution from the overactive synergist, right? And I'll use the gluteus maximus as an example to show you how we do that. So isolated activation of the gluteus maximus typically involves prone hip extension. So that's the single joint movement pattern, hip extension. Now, the synergists for hip extension are the hamstring complex, the posterior fibers of adductor magnus, and the erector spinae. So we need to inhibit these synergists as we extend the hip. And we can use reciprocal inhibition to do that. So let's start with the hamstrings. In addition to extending the hip, the hamstring complex flexes the knee. So if we extend the knee, as we extend the hip, we can reciprocally inhibit the hamstrings and reduce their contribution to hip extension. What about the posterior fibers of adductor magnus? Well, it adducts the hip. So if we abduct the hip as we extend, we can reciprocally inhibit the posterior fibers of adductor magnus and minimize their contribution. What about the erector spinae? This one's tricky. The erector spinae don't cross the hip, but they extend the lumbar spine. And by extending the lumbar spine, they contribute to the extension of the hip. Now, we don't want to flex the lumbar spine, but if we draw our belly button in away from our waistband, we can activate the deep core, neutralize lumbar spine extension, and reciprocally inhibit the erector spinae. Now, we would do this with all of our activation techniques. We would use special cues and joint actions to reciprocally inhibit the overactive synergist. We would do 1 to 2 sets of 12 to 20 repetitions with a 4-2-2 tempo. All right, so which muscles should we use isolated activation techniques on? Well, like I said with the stretching video, ideally, you would have a movement assessment done to determine which of your muscles have become inhibited or underactive. And if you'd like to learn more about that, feel free to reach out to me. That being said, the body does tend to adopt a predictable set of compensation patterns. So although every golfer may present differently, most of the differences between individuals could be viewed as small variations on the common compensation patterns. All right, guys, so if you're looking for a golf fitness program that organizes all of this for you so that all you have to do is hit play and follow along, you can find that over at trainfully.com. The Train Fully Golf Fitness program consists of 20 follow-along routines. They'll have an immediate impact on the quality of your movement and get you feeling better and playing the best golf of your life. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you for watching.